Who are those guys who can help carry you to the title in Week 18? We're about to tell you. Welcome back, in-game community. I'm Pierre. He's Chris. We're here one more time for the 2022 season. If you're still playing for your title, you want to know which running backs you can count on. So we're going to do, as we've been doing all year long, go through every matchup to tell you which running backs we like and who we don't. There are still a few running backs that you can count on, no questions asked. Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne, and Josh Jacobs. All right, the first game of this week, not a Thursday game, no more Thursdays. We're going to do a doubleheader on Saturday, and we found out that the first game will be the Chiefs at the Raiders. Now, you'd think this game might mean nothing, but the Chiefs do still have something to play for. They're looking to secure that top seed and home field advantage. The Raiders just want to kind of end the season on a better note. So let's start with the guy who was, I think, officially your unexpected league winner this year, and that's Jerick McKinnon. Is he just going to keep scoring touchdowns?
I mean, at this point, I guess he is. I definitely think Jerick McKinnon, in this matchup against the Raiders, on this slate here where there's going to be a lot of uncertainty with some of the top running backs, I think if you've got McKinnon, you just roll him out again.
How can you not? How can you not? I mean, he's been a stud, which is, again, I guarantee nobody called this, that he was going to be the guy who carried your team through the fantasy playoffs. Why not? Again, it's the Raiders. He just needs a few touches. You see what he can do. Always touchdown upside. You've got to keep starting McKinnon if you got him. Isaiah Pacheco, I don't feel as good about. He's been okay as a runner, but I just don't see the volume. And again, he's not the one doing the scoring near the goal line. It's been McKinnon.
Yeah, he did finally find the end zone in Week 17, but man, hard to count on. Yeah, I'm going to put him just kind of in the flex range this week.
Bucs playing the Falcons. Now, this is a game that really doesn't mean a lot for either team. The Bucs did clinch the division, and they've got their seeding set. Todd Bowles did come out and say, well, they're probably going to still play their starters, but the question is how much. So with that said, Leonard Fournette, who kind of had a really down game against Carolina in that victory, what do you think he'll do in Week 18?
Yeah, this is the first example of many of why Week 18 is so tough, because it really doesn't make sense for them to give him a lot of usage. We know he's got some kind of foot injury. They need him healthy for the playoffs. I don't see Leonard Fournette playing a big role in this game. I would be sitting Leonard Fournette this week. I think he's just too risky.
Yeah, look, he really didn't get that many touches last week in their must-win scenario. They just went aerial, right? They just attacked the Panthers through the air. As you know, Tom Brady and Mike Evans did it basically on their own. I don't think you can play Fournette because he's the first guy I can see getting pulled if anybody does. Tom Brady will probably stay out there just because he's Tom Brady and he wants to win no matter what. But Fournette, like you said, they need him for the playoffs. I don't think you can put him in your fantasy lineup. Now, does that mean that Rachaad White becomes a lot more interesting?
I think so. I mean, I think we could see like more Keyshawn Vaughn in this game as well, but I think you've got to feel a little bit better about White because, like you said, he's younger. He's not dealing with some kind of foot injury. I don't think they're quite as worried about him. So I think there's still risk here that they do bench him. So I'm going to put him, more as like a flex play this week.
Yeah, I think he's playable. And again, the matchup is pretty good, right? It's against the Falcons here. But at the same time, I think there's only so much, you can expect out of him. He's not ever really going to be the type of running back who's going to get 20 plus carries or anything like that. So I think he's flexible, like you said, but that's probably as high as I can go. And then what about Tyler Algier, a guy who has been one of those borderline league winners, been great down the stretch. Does he do it against Tampa? Maybe they rest some of their defensive starters?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough matchup. Again, like you said, though, they could rest some starters, but still, Algiers looked so good. Yeah, kind of like McKinnon. You've just got to keep rolling with Algier at this point.
He's a rookie. He's got fresh legs. He hasn't been used all that much throughout the season in terms of heavy usage. Not like, let's say Dameon Pierce, who they ran into the ground until he got hurt. I think Algier is a strong start. RB2, I think, is where I'll go with him in this matchup. And then Cordero Patterson, still there. Did find the end zone last week. Is he startable?
I mean, maybe this week he's in that flex discussion because, again, a lot of uncertainty for a lot of these teams, and he does at least have a chance to score. So I think this week, barely in the flex range.
Yeah. I mean, touchdown or bust is kind of how we've been with him. Like, he did score, but what else did he really do? If you're desperate, I would say maybe. But again, in a full PPR league, I really think you want more upside because, again, if you're playing Week 18, you're playing for a championship. I think you need a little bit more than what Cordell Patterson can bring to the table at this point. Patriots at the Bills, definitely an important game for both. Pats just still fighting to try to make the postseason, and the Bills will be fighting for home field advantage. So let's talk about Ramondre Stevenson, one of those guys who you thought was going to carry you all season long until, of course, the playoffs started. What are we going to get from Ramondre this week?
Yeah, it's funny because like for a while there it was like you just start him and you feel great about it, and now it's like sometimes he blows up and sometimes he kind of busts. But having Damian Harris back and healthy did not help. He did not see nearly the usage he had been seeing in weeks prior. But this is a must-win game, and he still looks good. Like, he looks like he's over the injury. He looked great last week when he got the ball, so I think you still got to roll with him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the usage last week, not encouraging. I mean, almost an even split now with him and Harris. I've got to think he's not nearly 100% because, again, his usage has just gone way down. They needed that win last week against the Dolphins. They got it, but not because of Ramondre. So I'm worried. But again, he's still probably one of the better options that you do have. This is a guy who they'll need to lean on. There's always scoring upside. Don't love the matchup, but I'd say he's at least still in the RB2 range. And then what about Damian Harris now?
Yeah, I mean, don't feel as good about him as I do about Ramondre. But the Bills' run defense has not been, very good down the stretch here. So I think another guy I'm going to say kind of in that flex range this week.
I mean, Harris still is what he is, right? Guy who won't catch passes. He's not going to get a ton of carries. I mean, the concern here is the script, goes against the running game, and they can't feed Harris and or Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, in a standard league, I think you can play him. If it's a PPR league, I don't think I would. And then we got the duo here of Buffalo, Devin Singletary, James Cook. Let's start with Singletary against, again, still a really tough Pats run defense.
Yeah, I feel like I keep taking the easy way out and saying, you can flex these guys, but that's how I feel about Singletary. This is a tough matchup. He could always score, of course, in this offense, but yeah, I can't feel great about him in this matchup. A flex play.
I'm the same as you, same boat. Singletary does have some scoring upside, but he also is sharing time with Cook. Those two running backs, their usage has been really inconsistent. So you could flex him, but you can't go crazy over him. James Cook, I mean, yeah, I know. But like, hit repeat. It's same thing. You can flex him, okay, in a PPR league, but that's probably it.
Yeah, I feel a little bit better about Singletary, but yeah, Cook kind of more like a desperation flex for me.
Vikings against the Bears. This is going to be an interesting one, and not interesting as in the game itself will be super interesting, but what are the Vikings going to do? Because after getting kind of embarrassed by Green Bay, now they're on the road to face Chicago, which still has 3 wins. But Dalvin Cook did get banged up, missed some time, hasn't been good lately, and this game really doesn't mean that much for Minnesota. It's not a very urgent one for them. So how much Dalvin Cook do we see?
Yeah, this is what makes Week 18 so tough because we don't know how much Dalvin Cook we're going to see. I got to think we're not going to see a lot of Dalvin Cook. He got banged up. It looked like the shoulder, right? He has had issues with shoulder injuries in the past. They need him healthy in the playoffs. They can't improve their seeding. They can't really do anything this week. I don't think we're going to see much Dalvin Cook at all. I really do think you have to bench him even in a great matchup.
Yeah, because here's the thing. They're a team that is not going to worry too much about trying to beat the Bears in the final week of the season, so much as keeping Dalvin Cook healthy for the playoffs. I don't think we see much of him. Look, we're doing this early in the week. By the end of the week, we could hear that he's ruled out or he's going to be limited. That's my concern. So as of right now, I'd say you got to keep him on your bench. Now, does that mean that Alexander Mattison is an auto start? Or are you worried there too?
Well, if we get word later in the week from Coach Kevin O'Connell that they're going to sit Dalvin Cook or maybe he's only going to play, a series or two, then I think you have to start Alexander Mattison. It's the Bears, and Madison will get all the work here. But I think even if, maybe he's being coy and saying we'll see or anything like that, I think Madison's still a decent start because, again, I really can't see the Vikings rolling Dalvin Cook out there for the entire game. Even if you get a half of Alexander Madison against the Bears, that should be good enough. So I think either way, he's a good start.
Yeah, I mean, you saw what the Lions running game just did against those Bears, who, again, have nothing to play for at this point. They just want to kind of put an end to this season. Look, Madison, I almost put him on the waiver wire saying that you got to pick him up for this week. But look, if you're still playing for the title in Week 18, then probably you have Cook. You already have Madison or he's stashed somewhere. But I think he's going to be a strong start, even if Cook isn't just, completely ruled out for the week. So definitely got my eye on Madison based on this matchup. And then on the Bears side, David Montgomery, great spot last week. Terrible results. Does he bounce back, or is this season kind of over for fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, Montgomery's one of those guys that he can always bounce back, but he can always bust. It's a good matchup. I don't see any reason why the Bears would lessen his workload. He's not under contract next year. He's going to be a free agent. They're not saving him for anything. I think you still start David Montgomery.
Yeah, that's what's interesting is Montgomery about to enter free agency. You wonder if that means he wants to go out and, end with a bang and improve his worth. Or if it's like, you know what, I kind of don't want to get hurt in the final week of the season in a meaningless game. So I guess I'll hedge my bet and say you could start him. He's more like a low-end RB2. I think he can do okay in this matchup. I don't feel like the Vikings are going to blow them out because, I just don't feel like the Vikings are going to go full throttle here. And then Khalil Herbert, going to mention just because maybe he's a guy who does get more run in the final week of the season. You think so?
I could make a case for it. The Bears may want to. The Bears know what they have with Khalil Herbert. So, and he will be back next year. So, maybe just a desperation flex and just hope that they feature him more in this game than Montgomery. But desperation flex.
Like, I could see a path to where maybe he becomes the lead back in this game and puts up a strong performance because he doesn't need a ton of touches. He's got that explosiveness, touchdown upside. But I could also see him just getting a few touches and doing nothing because maybe he's not 100%. He hasn't looked that good since coming back from IR. So I don't really think he's startable outside of a deep, deep league. Texans at the Colts. As of right now, still no Texans running back worth even mentioning. And, well, I guess there is one in Indianapolis, and it's Zach Moss. He's the guy, I guess, for whatever that's worth. Do you think he produces good results in the final week?
I think good results is the perfect way to phrase it. Like, he's not going to, don't expect a Travis Etienne 62-yard touchdown run, but it's the Texans. They're terrible against the run. The Colts are going to play him as much as he can handle because why not? I think in Week 18, Zach Moss is almost a must start, but definitely a good start.
I'll say I do think if you're playing this week, and again, you're looking for a running back, you don't have two studs ready, and even if you do, who knows if they're playing, I think you're going to want to start Zach Moss, and I'll go ahead and say I think he's going to be one of my boom picks this week if we even do that, because Moss, even though he hasn't scored a touchdown all season long, who gives up the most touchdowns to running backs on the season? You'll never guess. It's the Houston Texans. Maybe this is the week. He's getting a ton of touches. Zach Moss, Week 18, league winner. That's just, poetic justice right there. Jets at the Dolphins, probably two of the most disappointed fan bases in the NFL. I can tell you that. Jets no longer in playoff contention. Dolphins are hanging on by a thread after losing, I believe it's 5 in a row. So, with that said, the Jets, Bam night. What are your thoughts?
Can you really start Bam? It was fun for like 2 weeks, but it looks like this ride is over. Ty Johnson getting run, Michael Carter getting run. I can't start Bam night.
Yeah, it doesn't look like he's the guy anymore, so the matchup isn't bad, but again, at this point, the Jets, I'm not going to trust their offense, so I'll say no to Bam Knight. Not enough upside there. Ty Johnson, he did look good with the touches he got, but how many touches can he really get?
Yeah, that's the thing about Ty Johnson. He's got that home run ability, But without a home run, he's going to give you almost nothing. I'm going to bench Ty Johnson as well.
Yeah, I feel like he's one of those guys, if he got a shot, if you're like, okay, one of these running backs, like Knight or Carter was ruled out sitting, then you could say, hey, he looks like an interesting flyer. But as of right now, not interesting enough for me to start. Now, Raheem Mostert, been looking good. And what actually is interesting about him is he caught a ton of passes this last week. The problem is he's going to catch them again, if any, from Skylar Thompson. So, how do we feel about Raheem Mostert?
I mean, if we're getting another week of Skylar Thompson, you got to feel somewhat okay because it's like Skylar Thompson didn't even realize Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle were on the field. It was just Mike Gesicki and Raheem Mostert, like the only guys he seemed to really throw to. I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but those were his preferred targets. It's not a great matchup against the Jets, but still. At least we know Mostert's going to get run, and he's going to be out there a decent amount, and he will catch some passes. So, again, I'm going to say a flex start.
Yeah, and you're really not exaggerating much because Mostert and Wilson, I think, both got more targets than Hill and Waddle. That's the Dolphins' offense these days without Tua. So, yeah, Mostert has that, explosive ability. You can't love him based on the matchup, but I think he is startable. And Wilson, I mean, kind of the same, right? This is still going back to be mostly a timeshare. I think if you need a running back, Wilson is at least flex worthy.
Yep, I agree. I think I probably prefer Mostert a little bit more because he's got that, home run ability. But yeah, Wilson right there as a flex start.
Panthers taking on the Saints, another divisional rivalry that now doesn't really mean too much other than for pride. So, with the Panthers out of the playoffs, do you think we see a full complement of Deontay Foreman?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I don't think they're going to, rest him or save him for next year or anything. I think we're going to get the same Deontay Foreman we've been getting. Volume, probably needs a touchdown, not the best matchup. But I think, based on what we're looking at in week 18, he's still at least a good start.
He's the one guy, I'm not sure, but I could see maybe getting some limited touches because obviously he's got a ton of touches already throughout this season. And obviously recovering from that Achilles injury a couple of years ago. I mean, maybe they just keep him nice and fresh and roll out a guy like Raheem Blackshear. I wouldn't be shocked. But I think he's still an okay start unless we hear differently. Chuba Hubbard. What about him?
Yeah. Just desperation flex play. This is not a great matchup, and he's not going to get 20 carries probably. Maybe he'll catch 2 or 3 passes. The desperation flex.
Agree. Desperation only, unless we hear anything differently about Foreman. But until further notice, you probably shouldn't be starting Chuba Hubbard. And then what about our guy who was definitely not a league winner this year, but Alvin Kamara, still out there. Do you think he ends on a high note?
Probably not. It's a pretty good matchup, but I mean, what are we really expecting from Alvin Kamara at this point? Like, yeah, barely. Like, I'd put him barely above a flex start. So I guess he gets a green check mark, but only barely.
Yeah, I mean, considering some of the other options here, I think you're still starting Kamara if you got him. Just don't expect too much. I mean, single-digit fantasy points in Week 17, that's not what you were expecting when you drafted him, but he's still startable. Browns at the Steelers, not a no doubt must start, but Nick Chubb still had a pretty good week last week on the ground. Touchdowns now have still disappeared for him, but against the Steelers, are you putting Chubb in your lineup?
I mean, you have to. Like, he's one guy or one of the few guys this week that they're not going to sit him. They're not going to reduce his usage. They're going to run him into the ground. Not the best matchup, but not the worst matchup. I think you definitely have to start him.
Yeah, you have to start Chubb. He's still getting all the touches. It's weird because now Kareem Hunt, who's also on his way out free agency, he's just not even close to being a factor. Like, just not even giving him the ball at all. And look, this Browns offense is starting to come around a little bit. A little too late, but I think Browns still go hard to try to beat Pittsburgh, so you've got to start Chubb if you have him. And then speaking of going hard and peaking at the right time, Najee Harris, if you held on to him or if you traded and bought low for him, man, did he help you in Week 17. Does he do it again in Week 18?
I mean, he should. That was a tough matchup. This is a very easy matchup against a bottom 3 or 4 run defense. He's getting a ton of volume. He's catching a decent amount of passes. I would like to see that number higher, but it's not like he caught the game-winning touchdown, so I think you have to start Najee Harris this week.
Definitely must start. Again, I was worried about last week's matchup. Like you said, this one is a smash spot. He's getting the usage there, finally wising up and not letting Kenny Pickett throw it 40 times a game into double coverage. They're going through Najee. He looks explosive. You've got to start Najee. And then Jalen Warren also had some decent stats last week in their road win against Baltimore. Again, now at home against Cleveland, is Warren somebody we should be looking at?
I think so. I mean, he's actually catching a decent amount of passes and getting a decent amount of run. Don't feel as good about him as Najee, of course, because the volume won't be there, and Najee's going to get most of the goal line work. But I think in this week, based on what we're looking at, he's a good flex start.
Yeah, again, in a PPR league, because he's catching more passes than Najee, he's definitely part of the offense here. So I like him better than some of the guys like, a Deontay Foreman or a Bam Knight, who you consider the starters for their team, but I think Warren probably has more fantasy value this week. And then speaking of those Ravens, they are going to take on the Bengals in Cincinnati. Now, J.K. Dobbins actually looks pretty good last week in that loss to Pittsburgh. Road game against Cincy, how do you feel?
Yeah, another tough matchup and just not a lot of volume, right? Not getting, it makes sense. He's still working his way back from that knee injury, but he does look good. I will give him that. He looks good. He could always score. But this is a really tough matchup. I'm going to kind of put him maybe slightly above Alvin Kamara in that he's a better than a flex play, but I don't think he's a guy you have to start, but I'll still give him the green check mark, slightly above Kamara.
Well, I'm right there with you. You can't love his upside too much when he still doesn't catch really passes at all, and you don't know about his scoring upside because it's a tough matchup. But what's interesting is that Gus Edwards was a complete non-factor last week, and Dobbins has, I can't believe I'm saying this, looked explosive on some runs. So until further notice, he's still a solid start. Gus Edwards, I can say he's not.
No, can't start Gus Edwards, no.
And on the other side, Joe Mixon, you're probably going with him. Do you feel any differently because it's against the Ravens? I know these teams are going to duke it out for seeding still.
Yeah, tough matchup, but he's going to get the volume. He's going to catch passes. I think you still got to roll with Joe Mixon.
Yeah, I agree. There's really not many scenarios where you're not starting Mixon. Cowboys at Commanders. This is a game that is a fierce rivalry, but not really a lot to play for. Don't tell Ron Rivera, but his team is eliminated from the postseason. Dallas, I know they're not set in stone and where they're going to be seeding-wise, but I could see them maybe limiting some snaps on players. So let's start with a guy like Tony Pollard, who didn't even play last week. Not a serious injury, but are you worried about him?
Yeah, a little worried. I don't think the Cowboys are going to necessarily rest these guys. Maybe they only play 3 quarters, but I don't see them playing a quarter and then sitting them. And Pollard's one of those guys that he can always, make a big play. Definitely Washington a tough matchup, but I think you still got to roll with Pollard this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think he'll get enough volume to be fantasy relevant. And we've seen all season long, he doesn't need to be the only guy. Of course, he's a dominant running back when he was the only guy that one glorious week. But I think Pollard is still a pretty strong start. And then Zeke, maybe a little more worried because he already has a lot of tread on those tires, but is he still startable?
Yeah, you definitely got to be more worried, right? Last week, it was Zeke smash week, no Pollard, and he scored and got you 9.5 fantasy points. Yeah, this is a tough matchup against Washington. Definitely needs to score a touchdown. I'm going to say he's another guy. You can flex him. He's got touchdown upside. Just don't expect a huge game.
Yeah, I think that's as high as I can go too. Flex worthy, but we've seen there's kind of a cap on his upside, especially if Pollard does play. And then Brian Robinson, he got all the volume you could ask for. It was a great matchup. Didn't quite smash. He was okay. He was definitely worth starting, but do you think he is worth starting again against the Cowboys?
Yeah, I'd probably put him slightly ahead of Zeke because he's another guy that feels like he really needs a touchdown to pay off. I think he probably has a little bit higher floor than Zeke because he'll get more touches, and he actually looks somewhat good. But this is, Dallas has not been elite against the run, so not as good a matchup as he had last week. But again, I'm going to put him in that flex range.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And we don't know Antonio Gibson's status. If he doesn't play, I think you still should feel fairly good about Robinson. So I'll say he's flex worthy. Then we got the Giants at the Eagles, another NFC East matchup. Giants are locked. They're in that 5 seed, can't really move. Eagles still trying to clinch that top seed. We'll see what happens. So it's weird, but you'd think at this point maybe Philly has more to play for than the Giants. But what does that mean for Saquon Barkley? Would you be nervous that he's a guy that might sit?
Yeah, I think you got to be really nervous. Kind of like that we talked about Dalvin Cook. I mean, Brian Daboll so far is saying we'll see. We haven't made a decision, but there's nothing to play for here for the Giants. You really going to put Saquon Barkley out there, and risk injury and not having your stud for the playoffs? I don't think you could. I really don't. Unless we hear something different towards the end of the week, I really think you have to bench Saquon Barkley because I don't see him playing much, if at all, in this game, to be honest.
I mean, hopefully we find out more concrete news, before the games kick off. But yeah, I would be very worried because, again, Giants might be foolish even to roll him out for a full game. And I'm also worried that the Eagles, who have now lost 2 games in a row and really want to actually clinch home field advantage, might just go out there and finally, with Jalen Hurts back, put on a show and just say, yeah, we're the best team in the NFC. So if he plays, if they say he's active and he's starting, it would be really hard for me to keep him on the bench, but I'd also be really nervous. So to me, it kind of depends on who else you got. Now, what if Barkley doesn't start or maybe doesn't even play at all? Would you consider Matt Breida?
Yeah, I think you have to. He seems to be the clear number 2. I know Gary Brightwell will be a little bit involved, but Brightwell barely gets involved when Barkley is healthy. Breida is the guy who takes the rest of the snap. So not a good matchup. And like you said, this is basically a must-win for the Eagles now. So they're going to be playing hard and they're going to be playing angry. I can only put Breida in that flex kind of range. But yeah, if Barkley is out or if we hear he's going to be severely limited, I think Breida's fine as a flex.
I mean, I'm worried about Barkley even if he does play because of the matchup. And look, he didn't really dominate last week anyways when they were in must-win territory. So I can't start Breida. I mean, the only scenario I can see is if you have Barkley and he sits and you really have nowhere else to go and you have to pick up Breida, sure. But otherwise, I wouldn't be starting him. And then let's talk about Miles Sanders. Also, guys, kind of disappeared when you needed him most. Does he turn things around? Maybe having Jalen Hurts back helps him.
I mean, who knows? You never have any idea, right? When you have 2 carries in the entire first half in a game where you're playing the Saints, you got Gardner Minshew, you know the Saints aren't going to put up a ton of points. Why aren't you just running the ball more? This is a great matchup against the Giants. Again, the Eagles now have to win this game, which a few weeks ago sounded crazy, but here we are. I think you have to roll with Miles Sanders and just trust that Nick Sirianni will use him more in a great spot. I think you got to start him.
Yeah, and like you said, the Giants don't have anything really to play for. I mean, if they rest or limit their defensive starters, a guy like Thibodeau, guys that they need, maybe that helps. You've got to think having Jalen Hurts there will help the run game and the whole offense. So I say just roll with Sanders and see what you get. And I'm going to mention Kenneth Gainwell because he actually got some more run last week. Also a guy they might work into the mix to prepare for the playoffs. Does he interest you in any way?
Man, even on a week like this, I think you have to be really desperate to put Kenneth Gainwell in your lineup. I can't do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it either. I mean, people will ask, but at this point, I'd say no. I mean, look, I might feel better about him than Matt Breida, but I'm not going to start Kenneth Gainwell. Got the Chargers at the Broncos. Chargers, like the Giants, locked into their position. Broncos are locked into not making the playoffs. All right, so you're good with Austin Eckler still, assuming he plays, which you definitely want to keep in mind that it's possible he sits, but don't think he will. Now on the Broncos side, it's still Latavius Murray. Do you think that maybe he puts on a show in Week 18?
A show? I mean, I don't know about that. It is the Chargers, though, right? It's still. They didn't look any better last week against Cam Akers against the run, even with Joey Bosa back. But still, it's Latavius Murray and it's the Broncos. He could always score. I'm going to have to put him in that flex range at best.
I'll say given the circumstances of this week and the good matchup, I'll put him in RB2 territory. Not a high-end one, but I think he should be a decent start. And I actually am going to say I'm kind of interested in Chase Edmonds because, look, he's a guy who got 10 touches last week, and he seems like the ideal Week 18 flex play because he will kind of reemerge from the dead and do something. And he's the guy who actually will catch passes, caught 3 last week, unlike Latavius Murray. Am I reaching too deep here?
Probably, but you know what? It's Week 18. We're going to see some crazy performances in Week 18 from guys we never thought of before. So he caught passes. He's somewhat involved. It's the Chargers. I guess a desperation flex.
Rams at the Seahawks. That guy, Cam Akers, kind of a revelation mid-season. So does he keep it going? The Seahawks still have everything to play for. The Rams really don't. Does Cam Akers do it again?
He should. He gets another very soft run defense against the Seahawks, getting a ton of carries. Yeah, I think this week, again, based on what we're looking at, Cam Akers in this matchup, knowing he's going to get so much work, you have to start him.
You have to start him, absolutely. Either going off for over 100 yards or scoring multiple touchdowns. Now he's actually going to get the best matchup that he's had over the past few games, this stretch that he's been really good, because the Seahawks' run defense is one of the worst. You could say, well, maybe they'll just sit him and rest him. For who? Who would they even put in running back behind him? There's nobody who's even getting close to any touches. Yeah, Cam Akers, you've got to start him. Cardinals at the Niners. James Conner is the guy you'd say probably a no doubt here, but he did leave last week with a shin injury. Are you worried about Conner? You're worried he sits because this is a meaningless game for Arizona.
Yeah, this is definitely one you're going to have to watch. I know, a lot of times when teams have nothing to play for, they're out of it, they'll still play their starters. But in this case, remember, they just signed James Conner to that 3-year deal. They want to keep him healthy, right? They don't want to mess this guy up going into next season. I could see them sitting James Conner this week, to be honest, if not severely limited. I think, unless we hear something where he's fine, he's practicing, he's good to go, I think you almost have to sit him.
Very risky start, and the thing is, also happens to be going against the top run defense in the league in a road game where the Niners do still want to win. So, yeah, I would say Conner, probably a guy you should keep out of your lineup as of right now. And then on the San Francisco side, we're going to assume we still see CMC a good amount. Do you think Jordan Mason is a guy who could get a few more touches, maybe so that they rest CMC a little bit, maybe the game gets out of hand, anything like that?
You're really banking on the game getting out of hand or him doing what he did last week and taking one of his few touches for a touchdown, because the 49ers can still get the number 1 seed, right? If they win and the Eagles lose, the 49ers are the number 1 seed, and they're going to be playing at the same time. So they're not going to know, what, what's going on necessarily. So I think we still see a ton of CMC. I think Jordan Mason, way too risky this week. I'm not starting him.
All right. I don't think you can start him either unless they happen to say, yeah, we'll only play our starters for the first half. I don't see that happening. So, you could probably pass on Mason. Then game of the week, probably in terms of playoff implications, comes down to the Lions at the Packers. So DeAndre Swift, hopefully you had him in your lineup. He finally paid off when it counted in week 17, unless you're playing for the title this week. Can he do it again?
Why not? It's the Packers. It's a great matchup. He looks good. He looks healthy. I don't see why not. I think you got to play DeAndre Swift this week.
It would be incredibly stupid, and it would be probably getting what you deserve if they don't put Swift out there for at least half the snaps and get him enough touches based on what he's done, based on the fact that you have to win this week. This is your rival. You want to make the postseason. Why would you hold him back? Why would you limit his touches when he's the most explosive player on your offense? I think you have to roll with Swift and just hope that they're smart enough to give him the touches he needs. And then Jamal Williams, I guess it's still a revenge game. It's the Packers. But look, he actually put up a lot of yards last week. He looked good, not just in terms of getting in the end zone. Is he a strong start against this Pack team?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, he can always score, of course, like he did last week, and he did rip off a couple long runs, which we're not used to. And it is a bad run defense. So again, I think Jamal Williams, based on what we've got going on here in Week 18, is a good start.
Yeah, I mean, don't get too excited about him. But look, I know he's been mostly a plotter lately, and I know it's been kind of touchdown or bust. I don't expect a 100-yard game again or anything like that, but again, I feel like Detroit on the road, where Jared Goff isn't as good, and that pass defense for Green Bay is really good, they're going to go through their run game. They're going to have to, maybe not a monster game for Williams, but I think you've got to put him as a strong start. And then Aaron Jones, I guess when you didn't expect him to do anything, he emerged with a big game, 100 yards on the ground, and now he gets Detroit. Is Aaron Jones a must start?
I guess, what was crazy about that is even like the Detroit, like the beat writers, right? The people that were like are most tapped in. The Green Bay beat writers that are most tapped in with the team are like, yeah, I don't know. Aaron Jones might not see a lot of Aaron Jones this week. And then it was like all Aaron Jones last week. So obviously nobody knows what's going on here, but he looked good. He looked healthy. It's Detroit. I think you have to start him.
Yeah. Again, must win for them. Home game against Detroit. Great matchup. I think they're going to go give Aaron Jones as much as he can handle. I think you have to start him if you have him. And then A.J. Dillon keeps scoring touchdowns. Where do you put him?
Yeah, I probably put him, slightly above like a guy like Zeke, because Aaron Jones is going to get most of the work. Dillon will probably catch a few more passes than Zeke, but really probably needs a touchdown to do anything this week. So I'm going to say Dillon's like a strong flex.
That sounds about right. Strong flex. The upside isn't massive as long as Jones is active, but he's definitely been productive. So good flex play. All right, now you know which running backs you should be starting or sitting in Week 18 of the fantasy football season. We got you covered on all other positions as well. Check out this playlist for all the advice that you need to take home that title.